After about a year of using the dating app Hinge, I'd pretty much worked through every girl on there. I'm not saying I had much success, but since my preferences were kind of narrow, there weren't all that many potential matches for me. I'd check Hinge every so often to see if there were any new faces, but the vast majority were girls I'd seen before, having deleted their accounts before making new ones, and any actual new faces just didn't seem to do it for me. That's when Coraline appeared in my Discover section. Her name wasn't actually Coraline, but since this story does get kind of personal, I'm going to change some names to protect the innocent. Every so often, I'd see a girl on Hinge that'd provoke an audible wow from me. Coraline, or Coral for short, was one of them. At the risk of sounding a little ignorant, when I first saw her, I thought she might be like half Asian or something, but it turned out that she had some indigenous Mexican blood in her, and her grandma was from the native Nahuatl tribe. The point was, she had this unusual but undeniably attractive look about her, and with her dip-dyed shoulder-length hair, I found myself instantly captivated. But as I scrolled down, I saw one of her prompts said, "You should know, I was in a car accident and I have some neurological disabilities and scarring as a result." That kind of came out of left field for me, and I found myself confronted with what I suppose is my own bias. I was so game to ask this girl out, but I honestly hesitated when I read the thing about her disabilities. And I mean, why? She's gorgeous, smart, obviously super active if half her pictures are in climbing and workout gear, and from what I could tell, the fact that she continued to date after an accident like that made her extremely brave from where I'm standing. I'm honestly not sure I'd have the same kind of balls to bounce back after something that nearly killed me. That was what swung it. That and the idea that passing on a girl I'd normally swoon over just because she had some deformities, I think that's a bit of a jerk move on my end, I'm sure you'll agree. So, I sent her a message, and I did what I usually do and just hope for the best. After a few days later, we match, and the fact that I was so elated about it told me how much it actually mattered to me that she had some differences. I was excited to talk to a charismatic, brave, and beautiful young woman whose attitude towards her own adversity was frankly inspiring for me. At first, we talked about literature and traveling, and by the time she used the word petrichor in a sentence, petrichor is the earthly scent produced when rain falls on dry soil, I was practically throwing my phone number at her, and luckily for me, she was actually keen on continuing the conversation. Texting and voice notes soon progressed to organizing a first date, and we met for coffee and donuts one rainy afternoon, fixing all of the world's problems over the course of like a 3-hour conversation. I didn't even try to broach the subject of her accident. I figured that she'd talk about it if or when she was ready. But as she said, she had this policy of fail fast, and if I couldn't deal with her disabilities, there was no point pursuing anything. She showed me some of the scarring in her hairline and some of the scarring on her shoulder too. The accident had left her unable to lift her left arm above her shoulder height, but perhaps the thing that had the biggest impact on her life was the night terrors. Coral mentioned how she'd gotten her panic attacks under control with therapy and medication, but that residual fear seemed to have just confided itself to the nighttime. She said it was one of the biggest things that held her back from getting back to dating after the accident, and she'd often worried she'd have an attack of night terrors after being intimate with somebody. I'll be honest, I kind of worried about that too. Not so much because it would freak me out. I totally get why she had nightmares after a major car accident, but she was terrified of embarrassing herself, as she put it. So, I did something entirely against my instincts, and waited like 2 months to try and seal the deal, so to speak. I waited until I was entirely sure she was comfortable around me, sleeping in the same bed and all that stuff, and only then did I invite her back to my place to make the next move. I promise I won't go into any unnecessary detail, but it was wonderful, and even with the scarring she hated so much, she was beautiful. And as we fell asleep in each other's arms, I started to wonder, what was I so worried about in the first place? I wake up in the middle of the night, roll over to check my phone, and it's about 3 a.m. It's perfectly quiet, so Coral hasn't had night terrors or whatever, so my first thought is like, she's comfy and asleep. Awesome. I roll back to try and spoon Coral a little and find that there's no one there. I figured she's just in the bathroom or whatever. I have an ensuite. But there's no lights on and no noise coming from it. I check the floor next to the side of the bed where she's tossed some of her clothes and they're gone. And only then, in my half-sleep, half-drunken state, do I realize she's bailed while I was asleep. I mean, it hurt. I'd never had a girl get up and leave in the middle of the night like that, but before I even had time to process it, I heard the front door of my apartment rattling. So, little side note, I live in this really terrible Brooklyn apartment at the time, one where the door wouldn't stay shut unless you actually locked it from the inside. So, unlike other places, where that kind of sound would indicate someone was outside wanting to get in, I realized that it might well be Coral making noise as she's trying to get out. I didn't think she was having a night terror, or like some kind of episode. I have no idea what to make of anything, and I'm still half asleep and incredibly confused. So it was with a fair amount of nerves and caution that I edged around my bedroom and into the main hallway to see what was going on with that door. And just like I'd deduced in the final moments before I left my bedroom, it was indeed Coral, trying to get out of my apartment, probably confused and scared as to why the door was locked. I was sure that I'd mentioned something about it to her and that my keys lived in a teeny little holder by the door that looked like a little cuckoo clock. You wouldn't know it could open unless someone tells you. But then again, coming back home a little tipsy after our meal might have meant it slipped my mind entirely. Coral? Are you okay? I asked her. She just span around to face me, and it was only then that I realized that she had a corkscrew in her hand, and she's holding it almost like a pair of brass knuckles, with the screw emerging from between her fingers.
Who are you?
She screams at me.
Why is the door locked? Let me out of here before I call the cops.
I realized right then that she was having some kind of episode. She'd had a night terror, forgotten where she was or something, and now she was freaking out. It was scary, sure, but at least I knew what was happening, and after having talked about it a little, I knew exactly what I had to do.
Coraline, it's me. You came here after some food, we slept together. You're safe, I promise. I'm sorry about my door. I have to lock it like that, but you're free to leave if you want to. You need to calm down. But please.
I tried to get it all out at once, all while staying calm enough to bring her down from the brink.
Open the door before I kill you.
Having anyone lunge at you with a corkscrew is intimidating. It really doesn't matter if they're 5'0" incredibly skinny, but have someone lunge at you with a corkscrew when you're completely naked? That's real fear, let me tell you.
Coraline?
I started talking really, really slow.
I can't open the door without the key. I need to get the key.
That's when she approaches even further and pushes the sharp point of the corkscrew into my neck. Not hard enough to actually puncture my throat, but oh my god, one smidgen of force more and I'd have been squirting blood like a Kill Bill henchman. There came a moment when I was sure she was about to plunge that piece of cold steel into my neck. She took this sharp inhale and kind of flexed her arm. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I remember my heart just pounding in my chest as I'm thinking the next thing I'd be doing would be rushing to call 911. But right as she seems like she's about to stab me with a freaking corkscrew, she relents, and I can see this look enter her eyes as she sort of, and this is the best way I can describe it, wakes up. She sees the corkscrew at my neck and just drops it, recoiling like she was horrified at what she was doing. She looks me dead in the eye and stammers out,
I'm sorry,
And then her speech just degenerated into silent, gasping tears. My heart absolutely broke for her in that moment. The big thing she'd feared about getting back into dating, it had happened, and it was probably worse than either of us had imagined it would be. It was dawn by the time she calmed down, and as much as I insisted that she was free to leave, I wanted her to stay. I wanted to be supportive. I hated the idea of making her feel like I was mothering her or whatever, but at the same time, I just wanted to protect her and help her so bad. Not the healthiest inclination when it comes to relationships, but it is what it is, I suppose. I'd like to give you some kind of super happy ending here too, but my relationship with Coral didn't last. She just didn't feel like she was quite ready to date yet, and rushing it had made her feel worse than ever. That sucked to hear. It sucked hard. And as that dumb old cliche goes, if you love something, let it go. I still think about her from time to time, and I hope she's doing much better than she was. And Coral, if by some small possibility you're reading this, and you recognize that this is about you, I love you, and I forgive you.
I have been divorced for several years now, but not by choice. My now ex-wife Julia ended our marriage apparently out of the blue, citing claims of infidelity. There's just one problem. I never cheated on her. In fact, I was positively in love with her. My affections for her never dwindled in the least. I wasn't prone to spending a disproportionate amount of time at work or with friends, so I had given her no reason to think I was being unfaithful. Truthfully, she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Unfortunately, it took a messy divorce for me to see her true colors. The divorce court judge believed her adultery allegations uncritically, giving her everything she needed to wreck me financially and leave me with nothing. I considered pursuing custody of our 2 children, but I dropped the case when she threatened to accuse me of child abuse and molestation. Once she made that threat, I knew I had no chance of winning. The family court judge would have believed her just as easily and unquestioningly as the divorce court judge. So now I'm living in a 2-room apartment, needing to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, thanks to alimony and child support payments. And I get to see my son and daughter every 3rd or 4th Saturday. And frankly, I'm fortunate it's even that frequent. She's interfered with my visitation rights multiple times with full backing of the courts, and I dare not protest should she try to play the molester card. Some months ago, she started allowing them to come over to my place every other weekend. That's when I began to notice some problems. My son had a bruise and cut on his arm. I asked him what happened, and he shrugged it off by saying that he got into a fight at school. The next time I saw them, my daughter also had a bruise, and she used the same excuse as my son. That's when I started to grow worried. Both of my kids getting into fights at school within a couple of weeks of each other. I mean, it's not impossible, but I never really bought it. Over the next few months, I began to notice other problems. Their clothing began to look worn and exceedingly dirty, and both of them had noticeably lost weight. This didn't make sense to me. My ex was getting more than enough money from me in terms of child support. There was no reason for my kids to be looking like this. I tried asking my son and daughter what was going on, but neither of them would say much. This raised some red flags. I couldn't afford a private investigator at that point, when fortunately a friend of mine who was far better off financially agreed to help me out. So I asked him to install a security camera for my apartment. When I asked why, I told him, "Something tells me I might be needing one soon." After a few weeks, the private detective met with me and my friend at my apartment, and the information he provided us was upsetting to say the least. He had numerous photographs of my ex meeting with shady characters in out-of-the-way places purchasing drugs. In some of the photos, my ex was shown walking out of shopping malls with new shoes and very expensive clothing. She had been using my child support checks for anything but supporting our children. The last 2 photos were taken from outside the house, and the detective got clear shots of my ex with raised fists while my children were in a defensive position and sobbing. So much for the claims that they were getting into fights at school. He told me one more thing, that my ex might have spotted him at one point or may have noticed him a little earlier and got suspicious. He couldn't say for sure. Whatever the case, I had the dirt on this loathsome witch, and I was going to expose her. Later that same night, I was woken up by a persistent ringing on my doorbell. I stumbled to my front door and opened it up. It was my ex-wife. She looked like she was ready to shoot lasers from her eyes. If looks could kill, I would have died from a heart attack on the spot. But I kept my composure. "What the hell do you want at this hour? You hired someone to follow me, didn't you? To take pictures of me?" "Oh, so you saw him, huh?" I said, taking a measure of sadistic pleasure at making her realize she was screwed. "What the hell did you do that for?" "I had my reasons. Whatever the case, I've got the goods on you. Your ass is going to prison, and you're never going to be seeing the kids again, not if I have anything to say about it." She stood there silent for a few seconds, her rage seething. "If I can't have them, neither will you." Suddenly she pulled a knife. I reacted a little too late, and she stabbed me in the shoulder. I stumbled back into my apartment with her trying to plunge the knife deeper. I shook her off, but she took a slashing motion and got me in the arm, leaving an ugly gash. I grabbed my living room lamp and tossed it at her. It struck her in the head, and she was out cold. The police arrived, and I told them everything. My ex had regained consciousness by the time and tried to play the victim, saying that I was being rough with her and she only stabbed me in self-defense. I told the cops I had a security camera, and it would prove my side of the story. I knew I had made the right call having it installed. My ex got a pretty hefty prison sentence, combining her illicit drug use, neglect, and physical abuse of the children, as well as her attempted murder of me. She would be old and grey by the time they let her out. I couldn't immediately take in my children due to previous financial ruin, but the court agreed to grant me full custody once I got back on my feet. For now, my kids are staying with my parents, but when the time comes, I look forward to rebuilding my relationship with them.
I used to work at a place called O'Hurley's General Store here in Shepherdston, West Virginia. It was a real old-timey general store, the kind that sells everything from buckets and barrels to books and pocket watches, in addition to the regular selection of groceries and liquor. It was an all-right job for a young man such as myself, patronized by generally polite and well-meaning folk. Sure, I had a fair few drunks get a little rowdy when I wouldn't sell them hard liquor on a Sunday, but nobody ever put a gun in my face. But that ain't to say that I didn't have one or two incidents in there that put the fear of God into me, and this here is one of them. So I'm working late one Saturday night, stacking shelves and cleaning house, when a man walks in wearing a black tailored suit. It was one of those that fit him like a glove and gave off an obvious air of wealth, which marked him as an out-of-towner in my book. But that suit was just about the only normal thing about him. He was white as the cotton fields, so pale he was almost gaunt, with razor-sharp facial features and slick-back silver hair. I hear the little bell on the front entrance tinkle, so I do my thing and walk back behind the counter to serve him, which is where I laid eyes on him. He walks up to me, and with this wolfish smile on his lips, asks me for a can of lighter fluid. I fetch him what he asked for, making a little small talk as I ringing him up on the register. I asked him where he's from. "D.C., he replies. "Just passing through." I gave him a polite smile and asked him if he was one of those politician types, to which he gives the vague reply of, "Something like that." He then proceeds to take out the biggest roll of dollar bills I'd ever seen in my life, all hundreds from what I could tell, then places one down on the counter in front of me. I give the man his change, remarking that it's a good thing it had been a busy previous few hours, or he'd have wiped me out for change. I said it in this fairly jokey tone, expecting him to at least give a polite chuckle in return, but he doesn't so much as smirk. He just takes out the Zippo lighter from his suit pocket, just about the shiniest I'd ever seen, and proceeds to fill it up with the lighter fluid right there in front of me. I've seen a fair few of those lighters in my time, but never one that I could have sworn was plated with silver. I figured he must have been hankering for a smoke, something fierce, and I told him as such, but he replied that he didn't smoke. Right as he says that, he finishes up filling up his lighter, but not before accidentally spilling a little of the lighter fluid onto his finger. Then just before he pieces the shiny-looking Zippo back together, he brings the finger to his mouth and sucks the drop of flammable liquid from his finger like it was a drop of homemade wine or something. Now, naturally, I quietly recoil when he does that, not quite being able to believe what I just witnessed. He sees me do so and shoots me another one of those wolfish grins like he enjoyed the idea of freaking me out like that. I was just on the verge of asking him what that was all about when I hear the doorbell of the general store tinkle again. I look over towards the front entrance, and in walks this young lady who looks to be about the same age as my little sister. Couldn't have been no older than about 14 years old. Only she's dressed much younger, almost like how you'd expect a toddler to dress, in this denim skirt type thing with white embroidered flowers on it. She addresses him as Daddy, so I figured it was his daughter, and tells him she needs to use the bathroom. The man in the suit then turns to me, asks if there's a bathroom that his daughter can use, so I give him the key to one that we had inside the store. Only instead of just handing it to his kid, he takes out a little leather wallet-looking thing from his jacket and hands that, the lighter, then the key to the little lady, who then makes her way off towards the door before locking it behind her. I started to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Something about the whole situation just didn't sit right with me at all. I had a sneaking suspicion of what was contained inside the small leather wallet thing, but I didn't feel like I was in any position to confront the suited man on it, especially not based solely on a hunch. But it wasn't just that. The kid looked absolutely nothing like him. She had these soft, rounded, delicate features along with real curly hair, while the suited man's face was so sharp he looked like he could have cut a swath through a pumpkin patch. And the way she called him Daddy, a girl that age should be well on to calling her father Dad, Pop, or anything but Daddy. I tried to distract from my discomfort by asking him where he and his daughter were headed. "You ask a lot of questions, don't you, young man?" he replied, dropping what had once been a kind of formal civility entirely, and proceeded to stare a hole through me. His eyes, man. He had these narrow brown eyes so dark that were almost black, and I felt a shudder run through me as he fixed his gaze to mine. "Just making conversation," I remember saying back to him, shifting nervously behind the counter. "Well, you know how the old saying goes, don't you?" His voice was smooth, just creepily calm, like there was no emotion behind it whatsoever. Curiosity killed the cat. The suited man turned, then started walking up and down the aisles, eyeing up the products like we were some quaint backwater relic, which I suppose was exactly what we were. I get back to cleaning house for a minute or two, only it's more just going through the motions while I keep an eye on what this guy's doing. I figured it'd only be a minute or two before his kid emerges from the bathroom, and they fix to get back on the road. But 5 minutes goes by, then 10, and still no sign of her. Just as I'm about to ask him if he thinks she's okay in there, the bathroom door unlocks with a loud snap and the door opens up. There's no flush, nothing to indicate she'd actually been using the bathroom for its intended purpose, and when she emerges, she seems all sleepy and dozy looking. Then she hands back the keys, the lighter, and the black leather wallet to the suited man in a daze before giving him a lazy-sounding, "Thank you, Daddy." The way she said it right then, I knew he wasn't her father, and it was dripping with sleaze, and the look he gave her in return was one a father should never, ever give his daughter under any circumstances. It made me sick to my stomach, and I wanted the pair of them out of my store immediately. But we rarely just come out and say something like that where I'm from. We'll say something with an implication, if you catch my drift. "Safe travels now," I remember saying to the suited man. My tone was friendly, but the look I gave him was not. He turns and looks at me like he was about to go through me for shortcut, like he could have eaten me without salt there and then. Then he walks up to the counter, places the bathroom key down on top of it, and says one final thing to me. "Remember, young man, curiosity killed the cat." And then he walks that little lady out of the store and then drove off into the night. I seriously considered calling the sheriff right after they left. But what was I going to tell him? That a man was traveling with a girl that appeared to be his daughter? I'd be laughed right off the line. I could have mentioned that I thought that there was something illegal in the leather wallet that he'd handed her, but I got the distinct impression that nothing we could ever accuse him of was really going to stick. He had all that money, and that look he gave me too. So I didn't say a word to anyone. But for the remaining few hours of my shift, and for the next few days, I heard his words rattling around my skull whenever I paid any mind to him at all. Curiosity killed the cat.